Gentlemen, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on the European Learning Model, on the basics of the European Learning Model. You have shown massive interest in this webinar. We have close to 600 registrations, but not only that, we also have this webinar on YouTube, and I would really like to welcome also a warm welcome to all viewers through the YouTube channel of Social Europe. My name is Koen. I am team leader for transparency and recognition of skills and qualifications at Media Employment, Social Advice and Inclusion of the European Commission. Today, we have an interesting agenda for you, which has 4 different parts. We will start with a journey, with a use case journey of ELM, and this journey will be Anna's journey, and there will be a contextualization of the use of the ELM, European Learning Model, in practice, and this will be presented by Pia Likitalo. This will be followed by some policy context around the European Learning Model. So we will provide you with a broader context of ELM, how it fits within the broader policies at EU and national level. And this will be done by my colleague Céline Jambon and by myself. And then we will go to the third part of the presentation of this afternoon, which is a little bit more technical, which will be the basics of the ELM. So we will provide you with an introduction to the model itself and to its application profiles, and this will be done by Gerald Gutierrez. And then finally, we are going to the Q&A session, questions and answers. And as I already announced, all questions need to be submitted via Slido, and the hashtag to use in Slido is hashtag ELM. Without further ado, I would like now to give the floor to Pia Likitalo to see what is Anna's journey with the ELM. Pia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Koen. Thank you for this introduction. And the reason why we are starting with Anna's journey for the ELM is because the European Learning Model can sound quite daunting and technical. However, in its essence, it is really a tool providing us with a unified language to describe all aspects of learning and to ensure that it is understood in the same way across borders and in different contexts. So to help illustrate this, we will look at a fictional example showcasing one person's, Anna's, learning journey, and how the European Learning Model can help as a form of an invisible translator in the background. Here, the ELM can ensure that not only is learning-related information understood in the same way across countries and organizations, but also that it can be directly integrated into different IT systems by using the same technical format without the need for additional conversion or manual input. So this is something that you can keep in mind as we go through Anna's journey. A small note before we start, that do note that this is a purely fictional journey that is not yet applicable in practice, nor does it cover all potential use cases of ELM or how these learning flows or career flows would work at a national level. It is purely as a form of illustration and to give you an idea of what this could look like and what the different applications of ELM would be. So now you get to meet Anna. She is at the start of her career. She wants to become a civil engineer. And she's looking for job sites and identifying which qualifications and skills she would actually need to apply for a job. And having found a job that she would like, she sees what qualification she would be required to have to apply for it. And she looks for this qualification in her national qualifications database, which is in the ELM format, and looks at its exact description and the skills that are related to it. Once she has identified this qualification, she then starts to look for learning opportunities that would match this qualification, but would offer her this qualification. This is easily done with her national course database, which has linked the qualifications to its courses. So by searching for the qualification title, she can see which courses offer it, as well as all details as to when it starts and what learning outcomes are linked to it, all the details she would need to actually get enrolled in a learning opportunity that would result in a civil engineer qualification in Finland. And having found this, she applies and luckily for her, gets accepted as well. Now that she has been studying for a while, everything is going great. She thinks that she would also like to go on mobility. So as part of her studies during her summer break, Anna gets the opportunity to do a volunteering experience as an extracurricular activity in Italy. And while there, she undertakes this non-formal learning, for which the learning outcomes and all the relevant details about her mobility are provided in a Europass mobility document. And this Europass mobility document is also provided in ELM format so that they will be understood in any other situation without additional steps needed. And she will see this in a very concrete manner as she returns to Finland, because there she will see that her learning outcomes and the information from the volunteering she completed in Italy are already included in her home institution's student information system. As the data was provided in the same format, it could be directly integrated with her existing information, so the learning outcomes becomes part of her student information data within this national or the institution's system. And here we're talking about volunteering, but the same logic could also apply in the case of a mobility in a different institution or an exchange in a study context where the course information could also be included in this system without additional translation. And after her volunteering, finalizing her studies, Anna graduates from her institution. She receives her diploma also as a European Digital Credential for Learning, which is directly generated from the data that was available in the student information system without having to do any additional manual input. And it includes all the learning outcomes and the related skills she acquired during her studies. So not only does she have her diploma certifying that she completed her studies, but it has all the data-rich details of everything she did during this learning opportunity. And now her European Digital Credential for Learning becomes part of her online learning and skills portfolio. And what do we mean by this? It means that she has her own wallet online. A wallet is somewhere where you keep digital credentials, which is part of her online learning and skills portfolio that she can keep on growing as she goes along and use it to apply for future opportunities. And she will notice now that she's looking at her, as she's looking at her degree, she's comparing the data to the job offers for civil engineers, and she sees that she's still missing some of the practical skills listed for the opportunities that she wants to apply for. So she then decides that she wants to get these skills before she applies for a job. So she gets an internship at a construction firm, does very well, and they provide her with a letter of recommendation, also in the form of a digital credential, certifying the learning outcomes and the related skills of her internships. And this credential in the form of a letter of recommendation becomes an additional part of her online portfolio, showcasing a wider array of skills, and that she will now use to apply for job opportunities. However, she has in the meantime decided that she wants to work in Sweden, and she wishes to get her degree recognized. So by providing the NARIC Center with her digital credential in a standard format, in ELM format, which is also used in Sweden, the recognition process goes smoothly. And she gets a comparability statement issued as a digital credential as well, which she now includes in her online portfolio. Now she's fully ready to take the next step, and she will apply for a job at the Swedish government. However, they are not familiar with Finnish institutions, and they do wonder whether the institution from which Anna got her degree are accredited to issue Anna's qualification to be a civil engineer. They can easily double check this by verifying Anna's digital credential, which shows the related accreditation record for the Finnish institution, also in ELM format, so they can easily see this as a green check on her credential that it is from a accredited institution without having to call the institution or do any additional checks. Now that the Swedish government sees that Anna's qualification is from an accredited institution, they, as the employer, go through her online portfolio, which includes all of these different digital credentials that we talked about already earlier. There they can easily verify that she has the required skill set, as showcased by the learning outcomes and the linked skills in all of these credentials, and as well as her letter of recommendation. So she has matched her skills to the job application. Anna is the perfect candidate and gets offered the job in Sweden. She starts working in her new role. However, they soon realize that she's not very familiar with the Swedish national IT systems. The employer then offers for her to take a short course to acquire these required additional skills. Upon completion, she receives a micro-credential in a digital format. This micro-credential gets integrated into her online portfolio, growing the skill set that she will be able to present to her next prospective employer. And the idea is that this flow will go on and on through Anna's career, through her learning path. Whenever she will complete a job and wants to move to another one, she will get a new letter of recommendation with the skills that she acquired during this job opportunity. Whenever she takes a new course, it will be included as a micro-credential or other type of a credential into her learning portfolio, gradually growing the skill set that she has and helping her have a single online portfolio that she can use whenever she applies for a new position, whether in Sweden or in another country. And I hope that this short look into Anna's journey has given you an idea of how we can use the European learning model, and I will pass the floor back to Koen and Celine to talk about the policy context of the European learning model.
Yeah, thank you, Kia, for Anna's journey. And on the next slide, we will see the policy context of the European learning model, because the European learning model is, of course, not something that exists in a void. It's actually taking place in a policy-rich context, where on top we do have the European Pillar of Social Rights, which forms, the compass, actually, we can say, for EU policies in the social domain, but this is also broader in terms of the skills domain, education, training, learning domain. And you see here that the European learning model is quite in the middle, in the sense that it connects also these different dimensions, policy dimensions that you see here. And if we go a bit to the different initiatives, we see some more policy agendas that are indicated there, like the skills agenda, the European skills agenda, also the European education area and the digital education action plan, and then more related to attracting workers from non-EU countries, the skills and talent mobility package. Then also, of course, the ELM is an important connector in the context of European transparency tools, such as the European Qualifications Framework for Lifelong Learning, the Europass decision expressed through the platform in particular, but also the European skills classification and linking to occupations, which is ESCO. Next to that, also identity plays a role. And here we have the EIDAS regulation on e-identity. And last but not least, also anything that has to do with data. And we listed here the European Strategy for Data, for example. So in all of these, the ELM plays an important role, as I said, an important role of interoperability, connecting, and of course also then supporting the portability of qualifications, credentials and skills, and supporting the free movement of workers and of learners within Europe. If we go now to the next slide, we see that the European learning model is not just something that was invented from scratch. It's actually finding its source in different EU recommendations. And one of the basic recommendations there is the European Qualifications Framework, which in its Annex 6 refers to data fields for the electronic publication of information on qualifications with an EQF level. And in the recital refers to the fact that the use of common data structures and formats, and this is the ELM, would facilitate the understanding and use of published information on qualifications. So that's quite an early base for the European learning model. Another quite key text is that the ELM encompasses the data fields of another council recommendation, namely the one on a European approach to micro-credentials for lifelong learning and employability. That dates back to 2022, and the EQF dates back to 2017. And one of the things that we have been doing with our team is also to map the ELM to the different elements of micro-credentials that are identified in the council recommendation on the European approach. The ELM, therefore, is not new. It has a history. And for this, I pass the floor to Céline Jambon.
And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Céline Jambon, Policy Officer in the Skills Agenda Unit. I will walk you through quite quickly across the history and evolution of the European learning model across more or less the last 10 years. So there has been a lot of work ongoing regarding data model in the field of education, particularly, as Koen mentioned, describing qualifications information and sharing this information with different EU level portals. In the same way, sharing information on learning opportunities with some portals. And then we added additional use cases such as creating credentials. And now we are in the stage of the European Learning Model version 3 that was launched officially in June 2023. And the European Learning Model version 3 or European Learning Model is this all-encompassing data model, as was mentioned, that is cross-sectoral and covers all the different use cases related to learning. And it can describe many different fields related to learning. If we want to understand the success factors of the European learning model, first of all, it's a model that is extensive and comprehensive. So it is very broad in its coverage, but it's also a data model that is flexible with very few properties that are mandatory when you start using the ontology. And it is also a model that is extendable. So it's a European model, but you can make use of extensions to describe your national or sectoral or regional use case. It supports verifiability, so format and validity checks are embedded in the data model. It also supports authenticity checks and accreditation checks if applicable, and this is particularly relevant when we think of digital credentials. It is also the European learning model, a strong element for standardization at European level. So it can support the description of learning opportunities, credential, and accreditation information. It can describe learning of any kind of origin, and it is also cross-referencing prominent vocabularies. And finally, it supports the portability of skills and qualifications because this data model is multilingual. It's available in 29 languages, soon to be 30, and it is relevant for all education, training, and employment use cases across Europe. And now we can deep dive into the basics of the European learning model with our colleague Gerald Gutierrez.
Thank you very much, Celine. Let me quickly share my screen. Okay, let me know if you can see it. Can you see it now?
On our side, we can, but we're aware that some participants are encountering some issues viewing the presentation that we're working on.
Okay. Then thank you very much for the introduction, Kun and Celine, and good afternoon, everyone. Indeed, today I'm going to present the fundamentals of the European learning model. And we are going to start with why does Europe need a learning model? Well, the reasons why the European Commission developed the ELM is because until recently, no semantic standards were available in Europe for learning, and the market was very fragmented, as each country had their unique and different way to describe the same concept. Over the years, it has become increasingly important and urgent to facilitate the standardized expression of verifiable knowledge and skills and create the European skills database, which is accessible to everyone. To make it useful across all EU member states, the ELM is available in 29 languages, so it's multilingual, which together with the use of the standard ontology and the provision of accreditation and transparency tool has a great potential to remove barriers to recognition and support free movement. There are also many benefits of using ELM to document learning data. First of all, the model captures all forms and levels of learning and can be applied to the whole course lifecycle from the description of qualification standards, actual courses that people can search and apply for, and credentials that learners can receive at the end of their learning experiences to prove the acquisition of specific learning outcomes. These benefits collectively also ensures that the credentials, whether they are certificates of event participation, degrees, or employer recommendations, are completely interoperable. The ELM is aligned with European transparency and recognition tools and is free and open source. And in addition, it's important to highlight here that the ELM has a wider application than just learning opportunities and qualifications, as we will see very soon. The ELM consists on 4 different levels. On the top, you can see the European Information Model, which is composed of definitions and standards found in many policy documents and recommendations linked to standards for learning and qualifications in Europe, such as the UQF recommendation, the diploma supplement, the Europass decision, the macro credentials recommendation, etc. And this is complemented by glossaries for additional terms from other sources. On the second level, the European Learning Model is a general ontology for all concepts that can be used in relation to learning and employment in Europe. On this ontology, we can build so-called application profiles, which is the third level, and apply traditional set of rules and restrictions and support the publication of information and data, for example, learning opportunities, qualifications, accreditations, and credentials. And finally, the ELM also allows for national, regional, or sectoral extensions of the data model and the creation of specific additional application profiles to support the specific use cases and to adapt to the ELM to the specific needs. But what is a data model? A data model is an abstract model that organizes elements of data and standardizes how they relate to one another. It creates a uniform structure for understanding how each concept should be used. But to better understand all these abstract ideas, let's have a look at this simplified knowledge graph, which can help us visualize components of the ELM and understand the connections between the different properties. And now you should see the laser pointer in the screen. So on this diagram, you can see individual data points, but also the relationship between them. For example, if we take a look at the Ministry of Education and the organization and the University X, we see that both are organizations, and we see that both have physical locations. We can also see that a date can be the property of multiple items on this graph, because every person has a date of birth and every credential has a date from which it is valid. There are other relationships visible on this graph. For example, Anna Andromeda is the subject of our credential example. She's also an alumna of University X, and she has a claim to an applied mathematics achievement, which is basically a set of learning outcomes containing a reference to distant related skills. Anna's applied mathematics achievement was influenced by a course she took at her university, and she has proven that she has attained all the planned learning outcomes by taking a written exam. So this would be a simplified example of what a data model can be. Of course, the European learning model is far more complex than what this diagram shows, but with the help of the ELM browser, which you will see in a minute, you will be able to understand a bit better the data model and its various applications. First, it's important to understand how certain concepts can be described by standard properties, which may include attributes or characteristics providing additional information about properties, as we have seen just now with the example of Anna in the data model. It is helpful to closely examine how the ELM can be understood as comprising 3 different layers of concepts. These concepts interact in the following way. The specifications provide general information. Opportunities describe a concrete instantiation of a specification, such a course that an individual can enroll in. And lastly, credentials describe a claim about an individual, providing their participation in the course described in the opportunity. So this information is layered so that all details from the specification are carried all the way to the credential, meaning that no information is lost along the way and the relationships can be clearly visualized. In the ELM browser, we can see the different layers of these concepts and navigate the relationships between them. The ELM browser is the official documentation of the European learning model, the multilingual data model for the interoperability of learning opportunities, qualifications, accreditation, and credentials in Europe, developed by the European Commission. And as we can see in the table of content, this gathers from the most basic information, such as the introduction to the European learning model or the glossary, to the most technical information, such as the technical model artifact section or a more advanced overview of the ELM. And we also have the link here to the ELM browser, and we will also put it in the chat soon, so you have it in case you would like to take a look in your own time. As we have seen in the beginning of this presentation, the European learning model is a general ontology of all the concepts that can be used in relation to learning and employment in Europe. And on the screen, we have 4 blue boxes representing its multitude of uses, the so-called application profiles. And if you remember the slide with the pyramid, these would be the 3rd level right below deontology. In the first place, we have accreditation application profile, which allows to publish information on licensing and accreditation of educational institutions and or their programs. Then the European Digital Credentials for Learning application profile for creating and issuing credentials, such as diplomas, certificates, examination results, professional certification, and others. And the ELM provides the vocabulary to recreate traditional paper-based certificates and improve their data, content, and quality. The LOQ application profile to provide information about learning opportunities and qualifications, including the description of qualification standards, course catalogs, training announcements, and learning opportunity databases, allowing data to be easily exported and described in the same way across borders. And finally, the person identity application profile, which helps issuing student cards, evidences of membership of, for example, professional associations, teacher cards, and other identity documents linked to learning. By using the ELM, these documents can be standardized to help their recognition outside of their issuing organizations, sector, or country. And who are the actual users of the ELM? Who is it designed and developed for? First of all, course providers or educational/training institutions who use the ELM to describe their courses, reaching a wider audience and making their courses easier to find. National authorities who can transfer their national accreditation or qualifications data in ELM format, making their data accessible and transparent. Also, lifelong learners, citizens willing to learn can express their skills using the ELM, helping them to build a competitive skill profile and assisting them to find courses that can advance their career development. The ELM is also designed for credential issuers. They can use the ELM to build data-rich multilingual digital credentials that are verifiable and temper evident and help their overall digitalization process. Employers, the ELM supports the documentation of learning outcomes linked to frameworks such as ESCO and DIGCOM for organizations looking for verifiable skill sets in application tool. And finally, the ELM is developed for learning management systems or student information system providers to express the course and achievement data stored in the system in a technical format, fully understood and endorsed across and beyond the European Union. With over 480 properties, the ELM allows for the capture and validation of all learning-related data, and that includes formal, but also non-formal and informal learning. It caters for the needs of general education, vocational education and training, higher education, adult learning, labor market trainings, and others. And this allows for the creation of portability of rich data, for instance, the one that we can see in the screen, via European Digital Credentials for Learning. Its uses are not limited to a single sector, and it addresses actors in employment, skills, education, and training alike. And this was it from my side. And now for the key takeaways, I will give the floor back to Kun and Celine so they can do the closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerald, for explaining the basics of ELM, including ontology. Yeah, we have some key takeaways that we think are important with regards to the ELM. The first takeaway is, of course, that ELM is a tool for interoperability, and the ELM is a structure for data in the field of learning. So it's about metadata. And second, the second takeaway, key takeaway, we think, is that the ELM is multilingual. So the 480 properties, they have been formulated not only in English, although that's the starting language, we can say, of the ELM, but they exist in 29 languages and soon in 30 languages. Then the third element is that, the ELM is quite comprehensive. It covers all levels, all areas, all dimensions of learning. So it's not related to, for example, only higher education or only vocational education and training. No, it's really across the board. So it covers the full scope. But not only that, it covers also formal learning and learning taking place outside the formal area. So also the non-formal, informal learning. And then part of its comprehensive nature is also that we do, for example, have standard vocabularies that we stored at the publication office. So ELM really makes use of a very, very broad range of existing vocabularies. And the fifth key takeaway, also we think from the ELM, but also of relevance to this webinar, is that it is easy to get started using the ELM. And on the next slide, we see a few practical use cases of that. And first of all, this is, and if we could move to the next slide, that would be great. First of all, is that member states, of course, are invited to share learning opportunities or qualifications, and qualifications with the Europass platform and using the European learning model. Now, this is something that not everyone can do. It's limited to the countries that are involved in the EQF process and also in the wider Europass process, inviting them to share learning opportunities. But this is quite an important application of the ELM. So message to member states here is also share your opportunities and your qualifications. Secondly, starting with the ELM is possible through starting to work on digital credentials using either the digital credentials platform and Europass, or also creating digital credentials based on the open source software of the European Digital Credentials for Learning. Then thirdly, and this is an invitation to all of you interested, is to join the Futurium. The Futurium we created for the European learning model, which is a platform for exchange of experience between ELM users. And in this forum, the Futurium, you can learn from others. And the Futurium has dedicated sections to, for example, digital credentials, but also to learning model questions. And finally, you can, of course, get in touch with our team, with the support team. And you see that we are also co-presenting today the webinar to see how ELM can be of use, can be of help in your specific situation. And with this, we have come to an end of our presentation of this afternoon. And we will now move to the Q&A session, to the questions and answer session. And we have seen that on Slido. We have already received a large number of questions. So the Slido, in the way in which we use Slido is that you can submit your questions, and then we as a team are moderating, and we will show up the questions which we think are most relevant for today's webinar. And you can then vote on the questions, and with the team we will reply, of course, then to these questions that you will see here on the screen. In case the questions are too technical, because it's an ELM Basics webinar, we won't show them here. So this is more for a general understanding of the ELM. But let's start by the first question, which has received a couple of votes. Namely, this question is about how is a level applied to informal learning? Who determines this level and how is it validated? And the question also refers to learning outcomes identified for voluntary work, which basically is a form of informal learning in many cases, and leading, of course, to certain skills, to the acquisition of skills. Yeah, our reply to this question would be that, of course, when we talk about here the domain of non-formal, informal learning, if it doesn't lead to any qualification that is, for example, not part of a national qualifications framework, then this type of learning, this credential, wouldn't receive, of course, an NQF and therefore also not an EQF level. However, the purpose of digital credentials is not only to indicate a level, a particular level of learning. It's there to make learning outcomes, to make skills, and to make acquired knowledge transparent. So we believe that even if you do not have a formal level, it's still very relevant to issue any certification, any learning achievement in the form of a digital credential. And in case European digital credentials for learning are used, for example, this automatically means also using the European learning model. So I hope I replied to this question in sufficient detail. Second question that we see is whether the EDC is a concrete implementation of an ELM-based document. I would like to pass this question on to colleagues.
It's an excellent question. So EDC, meaning the European Digital Credentials for Learning, is indeed a concrete implementation of the European learning model-based document. So the data model behind the EDC application is indeed the European learning model.
Exactly. Thanks a lot, Celine. Then the third question we have is whether Anna can create a verifiable credentials-based curriculum vitae out of her portfolio. Will that be through Europass? I would also like to give this question to the support team, whoever feels ready to answer.
Well, maybe I can. It's not possible to currently create a CV as a verifiable credential. However, you can already, through Europass, create an application which includes a CV as well as the European digital credentials, but you would like to link to it as a verifiable credential. But potentially it could be a future application, whether in Europass or somewhere else.
Thank you, Kia. And maybe you can also give an answer to the next question on whether any guidelines are available for training providers, explaining to them how they can integrate their courses to the ELM and how they can issue certificates via European digital credentials for learning.
Certainly. So there are some guidelines already available for the mapping of learning opportunities to the European learning model. This is currently specific to national institutions that are looking to publish to the qualification dataset register, which is a central register for learning opportunities and qualifications of the European Commission. But this can be used as a starting point also for anyone else who wants to map their learning opportunities to the ELM. When it comes to issuing European digital credentials for learning, we have a full array of training materials available, from short videos on how to get started, as well as a full how-to guideline as well, which I'm sure that my colleagues can paste in the chat shortly as well.
Yeah, thank you, Kia. So the next question that we do have is how to make sure that employers write the recommendation letter in an ELM format. Does this require that the letter is issued as a digital credential? think maybe, Kia, you can also reply to this one.
So it does not necessarily require that it would be issued as a digital credential. However, it will, of course, help the process if it is in digital credential format, so that it can be easily integrated into an online portfolio. And here I can maybe pass the floor back to you, Koen, on how can we make sure that the employers will make use of this opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Kia. So actually, it's also possible under EDC that employers indeed use digital credential to provide a recommendation, and this will then probably be a very simple credential in institutional terms, but the infrastructure is also open for that. And it means actually automatically, if you use European digital credentials for learning, you actually use the European learning model. So you don't need to use the ELM on purpose. I think that's the answer also to that question. Then let's move to the next question. This is again, this is going back to the story of Anna. The story sounds fabulous. Yeah, it sounds indeed fabulous, fabulous story. Of course, it's not a real story. Yeah, so it's a fictive, it's fiction. But okay, it's a well thought through use case. And the person who is asking this question argues that, of course, the story relies on written learning outcomes that are well written, which also include the level of learning. And in my day-to-day experience, I find that not many people write or institutions write clear learning outcomes that also indicate the level of learning, especially in informal and professional learning. Now, what we can say here is, of course, that digital credentials for learning do always, or in principle, should always include learning outcomes. We know that indeed drafting learning outcomes is not always an easy task, especially as learning outcomes really reflect the broad nature of qualifications. For example, when we talk about qualifications, in this context, I would like to refer to the guidelines on short descriptions of learning outcomes that were recently published by CEDEFOP, and that provide guidelines on how to draft learning outcomes in a concise way. And this publication is a result of a working group that we had in the context of the Europass work. But this document is now published by CEDEFOP. We can post the link in the chat later on, and also corresponds to the, I would say, it's part of the wider body of guidance and advice on drafting learning outcomes. So, of course, in an ideal case, learning outcomes are crystal clear, are immediately and very clearly connected with ESCO skills. We know that in reality, it is not always like that. But as I said in my answer, I would like to refer to indeed existing guidance that exists there on the CEDEFOP platform, and most recently, the guidelines on short descriptions of learning outcomes. Let's move to the next question. This is about the European degree, and the question is, will, and now I think it disappeared from, at least from my screen, but it is about the relationship between ELM and the European degree that was announced earlier in this year, the blueprint towards the European degree in higher education. And for this question, I pass the floor to Simi.
Yes, indeed. So the question on the European degree, so the communication for the blueprint for a European degree makes a reference that it should ensure consistencies and synergies with other EU-level initiatives, including the European Qualifications Framework, Europass platform, ESCO, but also the European Digital Credential for Learning. And as we discussed today, the European Digital Credentials for Learning are ELM based, so that would make a link with the European Learning Model. If I remember also correctly, this question had a sub-question on the link between formal and informal learning. So there again, we want to stress that the European Learning Model is a data format, meaning that you can express and describe formal, informal, and non-formal learning, but describing does not mean recognizing as such the learning in this context of the European degree.
Yeah, thank you, Celine. The next question is about the relationship between ESCO and ELM and how they relate to each other. I will reply to this question, and if colleagues want to add anything, please step in. There is quite a difference in conception of, on the one hand, ESCO, and on the other, the ELM. So the ELM is a data model. So its properties, 480, consist of metadata, which means data about data. And this is exclusively related to, this is focused on learning. Whereas ESCO is a taxonomy, which exists of, on the one hand, occupations, and it takes the international standard classification of occupations and has added a layer to it that is relevant for Europe. And these occupations are linked to skills that are required, either as essential or less essential, to exercise those occupations. So, and for this, these skills come from the skills taxonomy of ESCO, and the skills taxonomy of ESCO exists really, consists really of concrete skills related to tasks to be implemented. There is also a hierarchy of skills, and next to job-specific skills, occupation-specific skills, there are also transversal skills. So they are a bit different in nature. Nevertheless, they are closely connected. For example, if you if you create a digital credential for learning, and you create, for example, learning outcomes, you can also link ESCO skills to a credential. So ESCO skills focus on the content of skills, whereas ELM properties focus on metadata elements around learning. Then the next question is about common accreditation standards for providers to issue digital credentials. This question I would like to pass on to my colleagues.
Okay, maybe I can start, and yeah, maybe you add afterwards. But first, we wanted to highlight the work that we've been doing with the European Quality Assurance Register, or ECAR, which gather accreditation information for for countries that are part of this process for higher education. So we have accreditation information either for the institutions or for the programs that are licensed. So within the European Digital Credentials for Learning, you can reference this accreditation, but we also have an accreditation database that is part of the QDR, but perhaps Kia, you can give more details.
I think you actually covered it quite well, Selena. I don't know if there's anything to be added, but yeah, sorry.
That's fine, Kia. I thought, yes, so maybe we can say we have this accreditation application profile that can be used if more countries or national authorities would be interested in sharing additional accreditation data. That's also an option.
Okay, and then we move to the next question, which is about the difference between digital credentials and micro-credentials. So a micro-credential is in essence a record of learning outcomes acquired or of skills acquired after either training or other forms of learning. And that is usually focusing on a limited number of and a limited volume also of learning that is behind it and on certain specific skills that have been acquired. Often there are courses which are also called micro-credentials, but which in the end lead to a so-called micro-credential. So, and this is really about the content of learning. Whereas digital credential is a format of a credential. And just to illustrate, a micro-credential, when you get it, after you have, for example, done a course or after your skills have been validated, that correspond to the micro-credential standard, you could receive a certificate in paper, for example, or you could receive your document testing your skills and that you passed the exam, let's say, of the micro-credential in a digital format through a digital credential. So actually, and it's quite important to make this analytical understanding, sometimes it's the same if a micro-credential leads to a digital credential, but it does not have to be the case. So the nature is different. Digital credential is either paper or digital, and micro-credential is more related also to the volume of learning. So I hope my answer was clear. Then we have a next question, which is about how it is proposed to keep up to date with the development of new skills, knowledge, competence required for evolving work opportunities and development in curricula within discipline areas. Semantics for learning and expression of verifiable knowledge and skills need to change accordingly. I will try to reply to this question, and maybe colleagues can come after. So this question is a very pertinent question, because we live in a world that is moving very fast, where new skills new skills requirements are appearing very quickly. This has been the case already, since long, but the pace of change is very fast, especially if we now also move, for example, to green economy, to make a digital transition. Nevertheless, we have to say that the European learning model as such is not dealing with those. It's not looking at the content of skills. It's not looking at the content of knowledge. It's really consisting of properties about data around learning. So this is about metadata. In that sense, the ELM has a longer period where it stays relevant. Nevertheless, we are, of course, also, and we have conceived the ELM as a flexible model. So wherever it is useful to add new concepts, to add new properties to the ELM, this can be done quite easily. I don't know whether anybody wants to add to this reply. Of my colleagues, and if
We
not,
all agree.
You all agree? Okay, that's very good. Shouldn't happen too often. And then we have a next question, which is about how the ELM supports the mutual recognition of qualifications and learning outcomes across EU member states, and what mechanisms are in place to ensure that ELM aligns with both formal and non-formal, informal learning recognition processes. Celine, can I give this question to you?
Yes, sure. So ELM can support this recognition of qualifications and learning outcomes in different ways. First of all, it provides a standard vocabulary, meaning that we use EU-level definitions. So there is a common agreement between all different EU countries on the meaning of the different concepts. Then the European learning model is a multilingual model, so that can also help support recognition. Then if we think about, because here we also have the distinction to make between formal recognition and recognition of formal qualifications, and what we call validation of non-formal and informal learning. So all these different concepts can help describe all the different learning achievements of a person, that can also support the actual recognition or validation process with its different steps of documentation of learning, etc., etc. So it can be a useful tool to help this more lengthier process. But perhaps Koen, you also want to say a couple of words on validation, or?
Yeah, no, of course, the ELM supports, of course, also validation, because it doesn't distinguish between the nature of learning is all covered, whether it's formal learning or non-formal or informal learning, doesn't matter so much in the context of ELM. So the broad scope of the broad nature of learning, so different contexts of learning are really covered by the ELM, which is, by the way, also the case for European Digital Credentials for Learning. It doesn't matter where and how learning was acquired when we talk about a qualification that is issued in terms of a digital credential. Celine, I think you also the right person to go and reply to the next question, which is about how to overcome the most common challenges the institutions face when trying to adopt the ELM. Are there specific tools or resources available to support smaller institutions or those with limited digital infrastructure in implementing the ELM?
Indeed, we have quite, and we keep on adding to our portfolio of specific tools and resources available. So first of all, I want to highlight again, we have this new space, the Futurium group, that is really a good place to get started. You can get information there, but also you can exchange with other implementers to get also some advice and some feedback. But the Futurium group is also a space where you can find tutorial videos. So in those videos, you have some information on how to get started with the European learning model. It can also walk you through the different steps to get more familiar with the data format. You also have the ELM browser. So it is a data model browser, meaning that you can go through the ontology of the different application profiles, understand better the definitions, and so on, and get started with getting acquainted with the model. We are also organizing specific webinars such as the one today. We also have a dedicated support team that can be contacted in case of more specific questions. If you are interested in the European Digital Credentials for Learning, we also make available a set of tools for free to help you issue and seal credentials. But for that, we also will dig a bit deeper into our future webinar on the basics of EDC. And we are also constantly updating the different information pages that are available on the Europass platform, in particular the qualifications dataset manual that has all the information regarding the sharing of information in ELN format with Europass, and in the same way, we will update the rest of our documentation. So there is quite a lot to get started. And then if you get stuck, you have this Futurum community or the support team that can be contacted.
Yeah, thank you, Celine. So the next question is about the key principles underlying the ELM and how they were developed to meet the needs of diverse educational contexts across Europe. The concrete question here is how the ELM balances standardization with flexibility required to cater for different national and regional education systems. So how does the ELM ensure that there is enough flexibility to care for different national and regional education systems, and at the same time be a tool for standardization?
I can take the question.
Okay, Celine.
So here we try to balance indeed between having a data model that is very, very broad. So we have over 400 properties to represent many different concepts, but we have a very core set of required and recommended properties aligned with best practices. So in the European Qualification Framework recommendation, you will have some properties that are marked as required properties and others that are marked as optional, meaning recommended. So this can be a set of core properties, but then you can build on the rest of the data model to have enough flexibility to describe any use case in the way that you want. So we really try to balance at the same time standardization with flexibility. And it is the same way, for instance, with the micro-credential recommendation. And for that, we have also done a mapping between the European Learning Model and the Micro-Credentials Council recommendation property fields.
Okay, thank you, Celine. The next question is, it now has gone up because it got more votes. What is the difference between ELM and European Digital Credentials for Learning? Who can I give that question? Maybe also Celine?
Sure. So the European Learning Model is the data model that covers all aspects of learning. But if you remember earlier from the slide that Claire presented, you have different application profiles inside the European Learning Model. You have an application profile called the Learning Opportunities and Qualifications, and that is the application profile to describe your learning opportunities, qualifications, information. You have another application profile called the European Digital Credentials for Learning, and this is the application profiles that needs to be used when you are issuing digital credentials. So when we are creating digital credentials under the European Digital Credential Issuer, so that's what the I stands for here, it is powered by this application profile of the European Learning Model. So it has a few properties that are required as part of the digital credentials format that are not required in other application profile of the data model. And then in the European Digital Credentials for Learning, we have this infrastructure that is available, so you don't even see that the ELM is there, but it is the way that the data is standardized in the background.
Thank you, Celine. The next question, which just got an additional vote, and that is why it is on top, is about with relevance to how the how the ELM ensures security and reliability of data shared across institutions and systems. What role does the ELM play in the broader digital transformation of education and training in Europe? This question I would also like to give to a colleague who is ready to take it up. It's a very relevant question, but not necessarily an easy one to answer.
I think Anthony can take the question.
Yeah, and then
Okay.
we
Hi there, everyone. So I'd say this is two questions. So first of all, ELM itself is a semantic standard. So ELM exists to really describe information, and ELM per se doesn't necessarily do anything for security. It does help digital transformation because without a vocabulary, you cannot do digital transformation. On the other hand, ELM is used to create European digital credentials for learning, as already been described, and European digital credentials for learning are secure digital credentials that are protected with digital signatures in line with the eIDAS regulations. Again, digital credentials are themselves secure, but that security is applied to the credential itself. So the credential is basically tamper evident and is assured to the identity, but digital credentialing doesn't get into this area of communication between one university system and another university system. That's kind of another area of standards, another area of activity, and is a little bit beyond scope of ELM and EDC themselves.
Thank you, Anthony, for replying to this question. And I think as you are on and have still your mic on, perhaps you could also reply to the next question in line, which is about whether the ELM is a standard or a format. And actually also, again, two questions in one. Is it XML or is it JSON LD based?
Okay, so first of all, ELM is a standard and it is a format. So it is both at once. ELM itself, so the core vocabulary and just kind of the list of definitions is actually described in RDF. And this is what we call the ontology. And the ontology is just a kind of a list of properties and definitions. Then we use that vocabulary in different contexts. So if you're using it in the context of course catalogs or learning opportunity and qualification databases, for there, we serialize it in XML and we also serialize it in JSON. If you use it for creating digital credentials, in that use case, we support JSON LD.
Thank you, Anthony. Regarding the next question, this concerns how stakeholders, including educators, employers, policymakers, how they can contribute to refine and expand the ELM. Are there ongoing consultations or working groups where participants can share insights and collaborate? So thank you for this question. Of course, very relevant because the learning model needs to be a model that is shared and in which everybody, of course, believes. We do not have a dedicated working group for the moment, but what we do have, and this was presented this afternoon, we have set up quite recently the Futurium platform. And the Futurium platform, one of its functions is to be a community for the ELM, where also users of ELM can exchange experience. And we will, as we are owner of the Futurium at the level of the European Commission, we are of course using the Futurium also as a source of feedback on the European learning model, because what we think is important is that users share their experience with the model, and it may be that certain properties, for example, would need to be added, or maybe we need to change the name of a particular property and so on. So we are using the Futurium as a forum that will give us feedback on the ELM. And of course, this doesn't exclude that also in future, ELM will be addressed in other ways. But at this moment, and we would like to really invite you all, if interested, to join the Futurium, and in the chat you will see the link to the Futurium. It's quite easy to join, and we of course do welcome your contributions. It's also an excellent forum where you can learn from peers who are also using the European learning model. Then let's move to the next question. This is about how ELM enhances the transparency of learning outcomes and credentials for students, for employers, institutions. How can the ELM help learners to articulate their skills and competences more effectively when transitioning between education systems or entering the workforce? Well, here the reply is that when a learner makes his her skills credentials, okay, this is not really the way in which the European learning model has been thought, because we have shown the different application profiles consisting of accreditation, of learning opportunities, qualifications, and also digital credentials. So if you are an individual, then we would rather advise you to go to the Europass platform and to create your and to use the e-portfolio module there to create your profile, and also to develop CVs from there. The e-portfolio of Europass also has a very close link to, for example, ESCO skills. Yeah. We can go to the next question, and this reads as follows. In connection with some successful examples of the ELM being implemented in education systems or training programs, what lessons can be drawn from these experiences? Are there specific sectors or educational levels where the ELM is particularly impactful? I would reply to this question by saying, of course, that the ELM is neutral with regard to an educational sector or an educational level. So it has a comprehensive nature. And again, it is related not to the learning itself, but it's related to data that describe learning. So it's more how information on learning is described. So it's not so much about the skills and the learning outcomes itself. When we talk about skills, the European skills taxonomy is ESCO, and for learning outcomes themselves, there is no specific taxonomy. There is guidance material that is available. So we cannot really say that ELM is impactful in one sector, but far less in another. It's really neutral there. However, when, for example, countries share data on learning opportunities, the way the data is structured, there the ELM is the model that needs to be followed in connection with the Europass platform. The next question is about whether the ELM does require a wallet, and what is the relationship between wallets and the ELM. This question I would also like to pass to my colleagues. Who wants to take that question? Please take the floor.
Maybe I can take this one. Hi, everybody. So when we talk about wallets, we are talking primarily here about digital credentials. So as mentioned before, ELM is a broad model, and the specific application profile that we're talking about here is the European digital credentials for learning. So in that regard, the digital credentials do need a wallet, and we have the Europass wallet, which sits alongside the Europass portfolio, which everyone is free to register for. In addition to that, EDC is published as open source software, so Anyone implementing EDC separately are free to set up their own wallets in parallel to this. So that's the general relationship between ELM and wallets. It's via the digital credentials.
Oh, no, that's too specific. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Justin, for having replied to this question on the wallet. Then we have a next question, which is about as a KIC, so that's of EIT. EIT is a European Institute for Technology, and KIC stands for Knowledge and Innovation Community. So as a knowledge and innovation community of the European Institute for Technology, we have a standard for accreditation of trainings to recognize informal and non-formal professional education, which meets quality requirements. Associated is our ISO compliance independent certification for learner achievement verification. Can this be incorporated into the ELM? This question I would like to give to the support team. Anthony, can you help replying to this one?
Yes, I can. So when we talk about the concept of accreditation in ELM, we are actually talking about two separate concepts. The first concept is what we call licensing. And licensing is essentially, let's say, something that is only done by governments or public authorities, and it's kind of your authorization to operate within your national system. But apart from that, we have a second concept, and we call that concept broadly quality assurance accreditation. And that is essentially things like ISO certifications, things like Microsoft accrediting its training providers, and other, let's say, private sector quality assurance systems. And these as well can be represented in a credential. So you can say that I am accredited according to this ISO standard, I am accredited according to this third-party standard. When you do that, if you are an accreditation provider, you can also provide, let's say, a public list of who is accredited on your website, and the credential can be linked to that list, so people can also verify that claim within the credential.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for this explanation. We move now to the next question, and this question is about the next steps. What are the next steps in which the education institutions in a higher education environment can subscribe to the EDC platform and to ELM? And the question there concretely is, do they need their platform where all data will be migrated, or can they directly connect to EDC? I would like to give this question to Kia. Can you help replying, Kia, to this question, please?
So any organization or education institution can get started with European digital credentials for learning directly. The European Digital Credentials for Learning Issuer and Online Credential Builder is available freely for anyone who wishes to make use of it. You can go and make an account right now and start creating and building your credentials. For the next steps on what you need to do for this, we invite you to join our upcoming webinar on the basics of European digital credentials for learning that will be in early 2025. And you can also access our training material online. When it comes to having your own platform where all the data will be migrated, this is a possibility. As has been mentioned already, this is available as an open source version as well. So you can integrate it into your own infrastructure, but it is not a necessity to get started. And do feel free to get in touch with us to go through in more details what option would be most suitable for your specific case.
Thank you very much, Kia. And now we go to the next question, which is the last one for the moment. And we can imagine that afternoon, 1.5 hours, we are sitting together here. Okay, we also getting a bit tired, but the last question is not less relevant, of course. Namely, is there some kind of interoperability between ELM and national developments, like, for example, the German desired mein Bildungsraum, so my training area, so to say, development towards, for example, a web platform. So Celine, I think you can reply to this one.
Yes, so we have quite a few examples of interoperability or connection between the European Learning Model and national initiatives or national developments. So we always welcome all those national initiatives and all the work around interoperability. We are there as well to support these different use cases. So when we get contacted, we always provide some support. We also try to see how we can best address as well the needs of the different national initiatives. We can, for instance, refer to in the context of the European Digital Credential. We had recently these 3 years of EDC webinar, and there we also showcased, for instance, the Spanish national development. If we think of other developments, we're in contact with quite a lot of different countries, in particular related as well to the qualifications databases or into the connection of the broader ecosystem related to education and training information. We will be always happy to support all these different initiatives, so don't hesitate to get in touch with us via the support mailbox that we posted in the chat.
Thank you very much, Celine. So dear all, I think we have come to the end of this webinar. It's now 3:30 Central European time. 1.5 hours of a webinar on ELM basics. We hope that you found this webinar useful. You can, of course, still pose your questions. We will leave it open on Slido, and we will aim at replying to other questions that will still arrive if they fit within the context of basics of ELM. I would like now to conclude the webinar by thanking, of course, the audience for your attention and also for your interest in European Learning Model. I would like to invite you to join the Futurium, to become a peer if you are an ELM implementer, to join the Futurium, so you can also there benefit from experience from your peers, from colleagues, but also, of course, share your experience, because others can, of course, also learn from you. So thanks a lot for everyone who attended this webinar. I would also like to extend, of course, my sincere thanks to everyone who prepared and participated on the level of colleagues and support team. I hope I don't forget anyone. Celine, Kia, Raul, Luisa, Justin, Anthony, you all played a very active role this afternoon. And last but not least, as we said in the beginning, so a recording of this webinar will be made available on YouTube through the Europe Social channel. And with this, I would like to close the webinar, wishing all of you remaining a very nice and interesting afternoon. And we will be back. We will inform you also, and we are informing on Futurium also on future activities, future webinars around digital credentials, around the learning model and related elements. And in case you have more questions also specifically to us as a team, you can get in touch with the Ample ELM support functional mailbox. Then again, please feel free to join the Futurium group, because the more participants we do have there in the Futurium group, the richer that group can be, because it's intended to be a real community around the ELM. So with this, I'd like to conclude. and wishing you goodbye.